Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Tonight's guest is one of our Twitter buddies, Ronald Potts. Tell the dear audience all about yourself.
Uh, Ronald Pot. Uh, I'm a carpenter by trade, so to speak. I'm decent at it, but I'm an amateur theologian and philosopher and all around Renaissance type of guy, I like to think. And I just kind of muddle my way through.
So you're a carpenter like Jesus.
Yep, that
I would
wasn't that
imagine
bad.
your handiwork is not as good as his.
No, I'm not as good of a carpenter as he is.
All right. So tonight it's going to be very interesting. We came on because we wanted you to talk about your journey from, I believe, Norse paganism to Christianity. What you learned on the way, and how you got to where you are now.
All right, yeah.
So, with that said, would you like to, go over Norse paganism? What's that about, and what got you into it?
Well, I went through several phases in my life. I went through just the general. I never was a Christian or raised Christian, or I went to church until I was probably 10 or 11, but we didn't really go to church. We just kind of went every so often, sporadically. And then, given the choice, I quit going. And I never did really learn much other than knowing the names of the big people like Noah and Moses and about the flood or whatever. I didn't learn anything specific. So I basically went from unbelief. And then in my late teens, early 20s, I was what I would call a militant atheist. I purposely wanted to be provocative towards believers and felt the need to tell everyone I was an atheist and mock a lot of people. And then I went to a kind of a non-militant atheism, to agnosticism, because as I went through life and I read more about philosophy, I became more convinced that I couldn't say, well, there is no God, absolutely. But I didn't particularly care. But I thought there was more to human beings than what materialism would tell you. And then I kind of journeyed along in that agnosticism for quite a while. And I ended up in paganism because my now wife, we weren't married at the time, we knew each other in high school a little bit. But her and another friend of ours, we had shared spiritual experiences and what seemed to be, at least at the time, uh, a past life experiences with each other, sort of reincarnation concepts. And I mean, they were real spiritual experiences that we had, but our other friend, she was a pagan, been a practicing witch for over 20 years at the time. And she was kind of our guide through it all. And that's how I kind of arrived to paganism. Is the is what she was telling me made sense of the experiences that we had, and they were more of the Wiccan. Her and my wife ended up being pagan too. They were more of the Wiccan pagan or the Celtic paganism. But I was drawn towards the Norse paganism mainly because of the warrior ethos. Uh, I was in the military when I was younger, and I went to the military to be a warrior, but that's not. I let my intellectual side tell me I needed to study an actual job, so I didn't do that. But I was drawn to the Norse paganism, particularly because of the warrior ethos, and because I felt like, well, I lost my dad in 2009,
12.
and this was a few years after that. And I felt like I had experiences with Odin, the Allfather, related to my dad as well, because at the time I was building a house for my wife and kids, my 4 stepkids, on the land that I grew up on. And while I was doing that, did most of it by myself. I felt like I had these experiences with my father spiritually and Odin as the Allfather. And that's kind of how I arrived at Norse paganism.
That is very interesting.
So you were
I believe Carlos said that he had a sort of a spiritual experience with his Lord and Savior, the Sky Father and the Tree Goddess.
Indian joke.
You know, because my friend Carlos is into that Indian paganism.
Nah, it's a great spirit for us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my friend
That's how much of our tribes see God.
well, my friend that was our kind of spiritual guide, and when my wife and I first got together, and this spiritual experience that seemed to indicate past lives together was a compelling reason that we end up being together and getting married. But she's kind of a Celtic pagan, but also was had Native American ancestral roots and was really into that as well.
You know, people are always talking about past life experiences, but they never talk about future life experiences.
That's actually a decent point.
You ever notice that neo pagans today never actually talk about their experiences? Like some will allude to them, but they'll never go in depth.
That's a fair point too. Actually, now that you mention it.
So, when you got into Norse paganism, were you like? Because I read into pagan Norse mythology when I was in high school, and I found it very interesting. A common thing that I found that Norse mythology and Christianity both have in common is they both believe in a sort of day of reckoning.
Yeah, I think that's.
With Norse mythology, they believe in Ragnarok, whereas with Christians believe when Christ comes back, the second coming.
Yeah, that's actually a real point and something that actually comes up in my journey. Like in my past life experiences, I felt like, I have the spirit. It's a real spiritual experience with my wife and I, like we were in past life. And one of those lives, I felt like I was connected to the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. And another, the main one, was a Irish Celtic tribe thing that my wife and I were involved in. And then there was one that was in like the 1920s, swinger time, roaring 20s. And it was like these past life experiences were like we kept trying to come together, but never made it there. Some sort of tragedy prevented it.
You still believe you had past life experiences now?
No, but I'm not entirely sure what to make of it, to be honest.
Could have been the weed.
It could have been, but that was another thing you mentioned about Norse mythology. Is I've always been very interested in Norse mythology, my whole life. I've always been very oriented towards Germanic and Norse mythology. It's always appealed to me. Like in my high school days, we did in the English class we actually read we read Beowulf, and that actually had a huge influence on me. I've always been a huge fan of the Beowulf myth,
Yeah.
and so I've always been very drawn to Germanic and Norse mythology. And one of the ironies that ended up happening for me was part of my reasoning for rejecting Christianity as a Norse pagan was I was thinking, why would I'm obviously a white dude with Northern European ancestry. And I was thinking, why would I follow some dude from the Middle East whenever my ancestry is in Northern Europe?
That actually does make a nationalistic approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I would say that if I would have followed the same routes, I would have gone into Germanic paganism.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot
Yeah,
of
but
overlap,
it's the same gods, really.
essentially. The Germanic and the North are essentially the same
And the
in
Celts
most
too.
ways.
The Celtic
Yeah.
ones too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting about the Celts is we don't really have any great information about where they came from, but it's supposed that they came from the same area and migrated.
I mean,
They're kind
I
of
believe with the Celts, I don't know, it might be this. Oh, wait, no, that's the Irish. With the Irish, they have Balor, the one-eyed demon god, who, when he opens his eye, all of reality ends.
well, the Irish are related to the Celts. So
Oh yeah, the Slavs too. They also share similar tropes and stuff.
yeah, and all that. Of course, it's supposed that all of them kind of moved out of Central and Northern Europe, or even Southern Europe, and they're all related in some way. But the Celts are actually kind of a mystery, from my understanding of studying history. That it's kind of hard to really pin them down.
So, since you got into Christianity, did your wife also follow suit?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
And
how did you come to Christianity?
well, I have a Jordan Peterson story.
Let's hear
I
it.
I came to Christianity because Jordan Peterson did the psychological benefits of the Bible series.
Oh, so it was recent.
Yeah, it's been maybe 5 years now, 4 to 5 years. So I was 30 before I became a Christian. Well, whenever Jordan Peterson did the psychological benefits of the Bible series, or psychological understanding, however you want to put that. What that did for me is that it, I thought I knew everything about the Bible because I grew up around a lot of people who talked about it, and I thought but I never read it for myself.
Well,
And
that
I
makes you
listened
feel
to
better. 90% of Christians haven't either.
it. Maybe not 90, but it's probably up there. um, but and I listened to a lot of people who supposedly knew what they were talking about. And I grew up in a fairly Christianized culture in the southern United States Bible Belt, but lots of churches on every corner, but whenever Jordan did those series on the Bible, it actually got me to thinking, because for once I saw that the Bible wasn't just I saw the Bible differently. I didn't see it as just silly myths from the Middle East or something like that, or just myths from the Middle East. And I thought, well, maybe there is value to the Bible, and maybe I should take it serious. I realized that I've never studied it for myself. I just depend on what everyone else had to say about it, or how everyone else talked about it. And so Jordan's series convinced me of there might be some utility in the Bible. And see, at this time, I'm married with, I've got 4 stepkids. I go from 0 to 4 kids in blink of an eye, basically. And there's a lot of problems in the family because my wife, ex-husband, was a very abusive person, particularly psychologically abusive. And so there's damage. And the reason why I find Jordan Peterson is I think I'm going to find the answers to solving the problems of the family through psychology. So I start studying psychology to try to fix the family. And so I come across Jordan Peterson just before he got, famous for the trans rally stuff and then the bill C-16. And started listening to a lot of his lectures. But so I'm at this point I trust Jordan Peterson. I've come to trust him. So he does the psychological significance of the Bible series, and it convinces me that I need to sit down and seriously consider the Bible on its own merit and let it, and as much as I can, let it speak for itself.
That is very fair. Yeah, I mean, well, you have to remember a good percentage of the United States believes Sodom and Gomorrah are a married couple in the Bible. And that Noah Ark and Joan of Arc are related.
No, she was not Noah's wife. Well, whose wife was she, Ted? I don't know, Bill.
Yeah. So,
But
since you became a Christian, I remember when we were chatting in the group that you had said that you, because you've also got into Michael Heiser, ain't that correct?
yes.
So basically,
Yeah.
what you believed before wasn't a total lie.
Well, yeah, and that's what's so interesting in my experience was, so Jordan convinces me that I at least need to give the Bible a fair shake and let it speak for itself, not what others, have told me about it. And then, because of Jordan, I soon find Jonathan Pajot because they start talking, and so I start looking into Jonathan Pajot, and he's real big on symbology, particularly symbology in general, but of course in the Bible too. And he's given, through Jonathan, I'm gaining a different perspective on the Bible, not the, evangelical fundamentalist literalist type of understanding, the more orthodox Christianity symbolism in the right spot. And what happens is whenever I'm reading the Bible and I'm understanding what Jonathan's talking about, is I see in the Bible how it exposes the pattern of reality. And so I'm starting to understand that the Bible is at least true in that respect, that it gives you a accurate pattern of reality and human nature, particularly. I'm with my pagan experience because I'm still convinced to this day that my experiences as a pagan, spiritual experiences, were real spiritual experiences. But when I'm bringing this all to the Bible, I'm seeing in the Old Testament what your typical American evangelical fundamentalist won't tell you or won't see, is that there are other so-called gods, other spiritual beings setting themselves up as God, but there's only one true God. And this actually comes together with my experience, because these other spiritual beings that I experienced, they had an element of truth to them, but they were lacking a fullness of truth. And I could feel that I was being manipulated by them in that regard. They would give me just enough truth to compel me, but they wouldn't give me full truth. And as I started pursuing these spiritual experiences from the Bible towards Yahweh and Jesus, I'm having these moments where I feel like I'm walking towards more and more truth, and it's not ending.
How do you feel? What do you make of neo-pagans?
Well, let me try to be charitable, but the thing about and this is another thing that I learned as I was walking through this journey, is I'm starting to become more charitable towards Christianity, right?
Hmm?
I'm starting in a place that is anti-Christian, and so I'm starting to become more charitable to Christianity. And I've always been a lover of history. I've always loved to study history, particularly military history. But I've always loved history, and particularly European history. And so I'm starting to re-examine everything that I saw, because the Bible isn't what I thought it So as I'm reading the Bible,
Hey there, Bryce.
the Bible is violating my presuppositions about it, right? It's not what I thought it was. And so I start re-examining all my presuppositions. And so I look back at history with fresh eyes, being more charitable towards Christianity.
Yeah.
And where this relates to neo-paganism is, I realize, especially any sort of European paganism, there is no continuous stream. There is a hard break. And all neo-paganism, especially European, is a reconstruction. And not only is it a reconstruction, it's actually a reconstruction through Christian eyes, because the people who wrote the stuff down were Christians.
Yeah. So they're trying to find out what they originally believed, even though they have no realistic way of knowing outside of the runes, which give very basic understanding, somewhat. But they still know.
Yeah. And
a thing that I always find interesting is when doing comparative religion, what religions have in common, and what mythologies sort of teach that are in common with each other. What I've always found funny is with Norse, even with many forms of paganism, like Norse paganism or the sort of paganism that Aristotle believed in, is that they all had sort of an honor code that sort of meshes with Christian.
Well, Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates weren't pagans. They were monolatrists who believed that God was the prime mover, and that the lesser gods were all these unmoved movers that were allotted by the one God, the prime mover.
Yeah, I'm
and
saying
they make everything go. They're behind the laws of physics and set everything in motion.
Yeah, and I was saying that, a thing that I found interesting with them is sort of where they mesh a bit when it comes to sexual ethics.
Yeah.
Like, for example, both pagan ethics and Christian ethics do sort of agree with the notion of, not hurting women.
Yeah.
So
And
I
that's
mean,
and that's the version of Norse paganism that I came to. The very idealized and individual, and for the particularly males, but even all for it. It actually wasn't particularly for the males. It was a warrior ethic for all. It was like a egalitarian warrior ethic, like warrior women and warrior men. And what I saw whenever I was reading the Bible for myself, and when I started reading the Bible for myself, I at that point I specifically cut myself off from the outside world as I was reading the Bible. I didn't want to be swayed by others. And of course, nobody can completely get rid of your presuppositions and your worldview that's going to influence anything you study. But I tried to as much as I can, being aware that I would have biases. And one of the things I started to see was that the things that before I was a Christian, I would have considered myself not only a Norse pagan, but a humanist, sort of founded on the ideals of the, founding fathers of the United States of individual freedom and individual right and Thomas Paine and all that.
oh my Lord and Savior, Thomas Paine.
and just not only was I a Norse pagan, but politically I was a libertarian. I became especially around the time Ron Paul ran for president the first time. I became a libertarian, and not only did I become a libertarian, I actually became a anarcho-capitalist.
But come on your further your joke. That evangelical fundamentalist Christians in the South also revere Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin as divine saviors.
There's a fair bit of that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always do find that funny how there is like sort of like a deitic reference to sort of the founding fathers in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also going back to the pagan reconstruction that the neo-pagans are trying to do, I highly doubt that their gods would agree with them on social justice, since most of them seem to latch onto that.
I absolutely agree, and that's interesting. I find it interesting because I was drawn to Norse paganism, particularly, like I said, because of the warrior ethos. And, well, I've always been conservative politically. Well, I would have said I was politically conservative, but socially liberal. That old line, but I've always leaned conservative. And I went to the military, and I was pursuing this warrior ethos, and I was also egalitarian humanist type person, because if I had a holy doctrine at the grow as a young adult, it would have been the ideals expressed in the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and the writings of Thomas Paine and stuff like that, and John Adams. Individualist freedom and pursuit of happiness type of stuff. Yeah, that's one of the things whenever I started examining neo-paganism is that I realized, and as I'm reading the Bible, I'm re-examining all my presuppositions, and I'm re-examining history with a charitable definition of, or a charitable eye toward Christianity. And what I'm finding consistently, and this is something you find in others like Tom Holland, is that you can't really separate the evolution of history in Europe from Christianity.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but going on the warrior ethics, which is, it's actually hypocritical when Norse neo-pagans rip on, try to go after Christians with the violence in the Old Testament, even though their culture literally revolves around it.
Oh yeah.
And the Vikings practically bragged about pillage and rape.
Yeah, and I agree with you what you said about neo-pagans that seem to consistently trend towards social justice narrative. Is there's no way that you're going to convince me that Thor and Odin and all of these are going to be social justice advocates, you know?
Even if,
Yeah.
like, there's these, not gonna name names, but there's these prominent neo-pagans that went on a stream like a few weeks ago talking about toxic masculinity.
Be a Norse pagan and talk about toxic masculinity in the modern sense of the narrative is hilarious.
Like if they ever actually went back in time and lectured the Vikings on toxic masculinity, like they would like come up with a dozen different ways to publicly humiliate them before bashing their skulls in.
Yeah, they might even get a screaming eagle, huh?
I mean, yeah, because we all know that Thor and Odin, you know, they were the pillars of non-masculine energy.
They were very in touch with their feelings, I'm sure.
They were very in touch with their feelings and inflicting a lot of feelings onto people, if you know what I mean.
Well, they were very intimate with the internal organs.
I mean, the most progressive thing you can say about the Vikings is that they had women warriors as shield maidens.
Yeah,
That's about.
Well, and you know, another thing that kind of shaped my view on Vikings, and there's some scholarship to back it up, but I don't know. There's always disagreements in scholarship, and there's always, anyways, is, you know, I grew up as a Southern dude, and there is a culture in the South that is like the dude is the provider and the wife owns the house. I mean, she's the queen of the house, and the dude is the provider. But there is a mutual respect in those realms. It's like, in my experience of the culture, is that the you know, typically the guy is the head of the house, but the home is the domain of the woman, and there's a respect there, and in those roles, and that's kind of what I brought to the understanding of Vikings.
Hold on. There's this one more thing before I forget. They also like to say that they perform sacrifices just to say so, but they actually like incense, and they try to rationalize that it's a form of sacrifice when, like, no, it's just lighting up the room and making it smell better. Like the Israelite Levite priests lit incense, but they still did animal sacrifices.
Yeah.
But if you're a Norse pagan, and if you don't perform animal sacrifices or bathe in the blood of your enemies, I don't consider your beliefs legitimate.
Well, I mean, I think they do have something to answer there. I mean, Christianity can say this is why we don't do that anymore, but neo-pagan,
which is why they have to borrow from the Christian worldview in order to survive.
Yeah, because neo-paganism does not have it built in that this is why we don't do it anymore.
And neo-pagan itself is a product of the 50s, so their religion's largely made up.
Exactly. That's what I found out as I started examining stuff, especially
Mormonism.
Hmm?
Is it like Mormonism?
And Wiccan.
Yeah, it's like Wiccan starts in the 50s and 60s, you know, and it's a cult movement that starts. And it's a complete reconstruction. Like I said, there's a hard break between especially European, but even like Egyptian, if you want to go Egyptian or Mesopotamian, paganism. There's this hard break where there's no continuous line, and you can say, well, that's because of Christian oppression or whatever, but that's not the point. The point is there's a hard.
Yeah, like they never did any oppression before.
Yeah, well, yeah, but there is a hard break. There's no continuous line of this tradition, and it's all a reconstruction. Like the runes, of course, I did read runes and I studied runes. That's all reconstructed.
And they're usually the pagans usually get on people's cases about it. I like to remind them that the Christian Vikings rose up and kicked the pagan Vikings' asses.
Yeah, and we shared that one particular video that's really good. I can't remember what the source of it right now, but it wasn't that there was a great deal of Christians coming in, and there was some.
Well, yeah, they did terrible things, but
the Norse kings became Christian and did it themselves. It wasn't like Rome was sending armies to the Norse to crush them.
Yeah, it was just like Rome. The Roman emperors did to Christianity what they did with the Greek religion. They made it their own, and it became tied with the fate of empires ever since. And when the Norse kings did it, it wasn't really particularly spiritual devotion of themselves. It was probably for more political reasons to unite people, because more and more were becoming Christians, and they announced to the people, "Okay, we're Christians now."
Well, what you see in a lot of European history is that the kings or the emperors or whatever would become Christian, and then they would force it down from there. And it wasn't so much that Rome was doing it, it was these kings and emperors were doing it. Of course, there was some with Rome, but...
So, have you guys submitted to Joe Biden as Romans 13:1 has commanded everyone to do?
No.
Yeah, imagine like his god awful press secretary. Like the opinions of the emperor do not affect the I forgot what she said, but the opinions of the emperor do not reflect the emperor's position of the people of Rome, because of what he said about the border crisis.
He did say that?
Yeah, because he accidentally slipped up and called it a crisis. Because the narrative is that the previous he who should not be named was the big bad monster responsible for all the terrible stuff that happened at the border. What? But things are worse at the border now, so they're trying to pretend things are better now, even though the conditions there are worse than jail.
Yeah.
So he slipped up and called it a crisis, and she's like, "Oh no, he didn't mean that."
No. Well, I've almost completely fallen out of politics now.
You know, creepy, sleepy Beijing Biden. So yeah, I mean, so now that you have gotten out of Norse mythology and you moved on to Christianity, did you ever get into denomination hunting, where you tried to find the denomination that worked best for you in Christianity?
No, not really. And maybe well, of course, like I said, Jonathan Pageau and Jordan Peterson had a lot of influence on me in my beginning. So one of the things I strongly considered was Eastern Orthodoxy. But one of the great failings of the Eastern Orthodox Church is they're not very widespread. They like to claim to be the only church, but then they're not very widespread. So the closest Eastern Orthodox church to me was like an hour and a half one way. And I figured if I was going to be in a church, I wanted to be a part of the community. And I actually started going to church before I was a Christian. I would say I was a Christian before I actually believed.
I just hate most of the people that go to church.
I
said, like most of the people that go to church.
Yeah. And 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 so if I was going to go to church, even if I didn't believe, I wanted to be a part of a community. So an hour and a half one way, there's no way. I mean, you could go to church and you could participate in church services, but you could not be part of a community an hour and a half one way. And as it happens, my primary vehicle is the 95 F-250 with a 7.3 diesel and 12 miles a gallon of diesel fuel, and and it's 20 plus years old, and it beats you to death on the interstate. But
Well, as long as you never become a Methodist, you're good.
well, my denomination that I end up in is actually close to Methodism, but it's not quite Methodist. It's from the same stream,
Mm,
but that
yeah.
so it may have been an act of convenience, but the church I ended up going to initially is only 5 minutes. But I was going there, I was getting spiritual experiences and having. It seemed right. It seemed like God wanted me there.
Yeah. I mean, I was a Methodist for a little while before I got out, and I mean, what attracted me to them was their position on the Pope and their charity services. And then I really started looking into the Methodist church culture. This was after I had left Christianity altogether. I said, I'm so glad I never went to the church.
Well, the Methodists do a great deal of charity.
Yeah, I still like that about them. Although I found out how liberal many Methodist churches are becoming.
Yeah, they're in the midst of a split, and I have considerable disagreements with a lot of that too, as an outsider.
Well, it could have been worse. You could have become a Mormon.
Yeah.
Well, or a Southern Evangelical Baptist.
Well, neither one of those is an option. I've had a lot of close people I've known connected with Mormonism, so there was no way that was going to happen. And it was the classic caricature of American evangelical fundamentalists that I rejected in my youth. I mean, that was never going to be an option.
I mean, so you couldn't accept that Joseph Smith was your Lord and Savior?
Or the Founding Fathers.
Yeah.
Actually, Mormonism is exclusively a white American man's religion. I mean, cult. It's a mainstream cult, but it's not really a legitimate religion.
Well, they have quite a presence in Samoan.
Really?
I mean, I do like the Mormons when it comes to because they're actually more of what they call it. They believe more in the separation of church and state than many other people. Mainly because they have a history of the U.S. government trying to persecute them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because their prophet was a convicted fraud.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Jesus was a person found guilty of capital punishment.
Blasphemy.
Well, I mean, yeah, he was Jesus technically wouldn't be allowed to vote because he has a criminal record.
But yeah, I mean, kind of back to another point is I do find it kind of strange, particularly for Norse neo-pagans to be real big into SJW stuff and a lot of that stuff.
Probably just to stick it to the Christian norms, but Christian norms have been battered into submission for some time now.
Well, and you do find that, to be perfectly frank, you do find that in paganism is a lot of it is a reaction to a perceived Christian majority, which in our culture.
Oh yeah, one of them. I'm not going to name his name, but he acts all big and tough, but he's scared of Christians.
Yeah, well, you find that with a lot of the internet atheists too.
I think a lot of them, though. I think a lot of pagans are legitimate, are sincere that they believe what they do. They just don't know how to go about it. But a lot of them are also just cosplaying atheists.
There is a fair bit of that. I think that's accurate.
I mean, it's sort of like the satanic church.
Oh yeah, they're just trolls.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically solely exist just to troll Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, and it's like this. It's like compelled by this provocation, to be provocative, but it's this cheap provocativism. It's like nothing to it. It's like they just want to get the church lady riled up.
I mean, if they really want to rile people up, they can do all sorts of things, caricatures about Muhammad.
Oh yeah,
peace be upon him,
or Buddha for that matter. They don't usually go after any of those prophets.
I mean, I remember when we did have a Buddhist on, I did ask him the questions like, Buddhism is about, being free of all desires. And I said, would being free of the want of the desire to be free of all desires be included? And that sort of got a good laugh.
Well,
what are you
eating?
What are you eating, Carlos?
I'm not. Who's Carlos?
Just tell me what you're eating.
Watermelon.
That's racist.
Why is it racist? Does it have to be a race thing?
Everything's got to be a race thing now.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, we all know that we all have.
We live in a country where you're not allowed to peacefully stab somebody.
Well, I mean, you have to remember that we all are infected with whiteness.
And that Chauvin was convicted of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and first-degree murder. Like, Schrodinger's cat had nothing on that trial.
I know. It is all very funny, although, I mean, when it comes to that, I didn't think he deserved to go to prison for something. I just thought it would be manslaughter.
It was definitely manslaughter. Like, he's gonna get appeal because one of the jurors admitted that she was afraid.
Well, yeah. I mean, the judge didn't even sequester the jury. How insane is that? And I'm afraid that they just, when this all came up, I was afraid that they were either not going to go to trial or that they were going to overcharge him, and I think they've done that.
It was because of mob intimidation.
Yeah,
it was manslaughter at best.
Yeah, I mean, I did think that he deserved to be charged with something like manslaughter. I thought murder was a bit much.
No, it wasn't murder.
Well, I thought, I thought manslaughter would be, like, given the circumstance, I thought that would have been fair, which, that still carries a pretty hefty prison sentence.
And the family's got all those millions of dollars in settlement, but even but they're still not satisfied. They still want to burn this country down.
Well, I think manslaughter would have been fair, or negligent homicide, whichever's worse. But I think they've overcharged him at this point, and I suspect there's going to be a mistrial on appeal.
Yeah.
I think that at this point, the best thing that Chauvin could hope for would be that they eliminate the top charges, which would be the murder charges, and then they just would stick him with the manslaughter charges. That, in my opinion, would probably be the best result that he could hope for.
Yeah,
The
because
worst result that he could hope for is that they all stick.
because they're not going to be satisfied either way, so just charge him with what actually happened, manslaughter.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean that's the thing. If they're not going to be satisfied on appeal, if he gets anything reduced, they're going to riot. If after his guilty verdict, they're going to riot.
Oh, yes, especially if the other cops get on bail or acquitted.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just looking for some reason to riot, which
And Kyle Rittenhouse, he was definitely justified.
Yeah.
That seems to be the case. From what?
Yeah, because he was actually a hero because the guys he killed, one of them was a wife beater and the other one was a pedophile.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting whenever the video before the first video that came out, where he was in the parking lot and there were shots fired. I mean, you can understand his frame of mind at that point.
So, before we get on to politics, I did like to say, since we did get into Michael Heiser and stuff, so,
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, let's get Kyle on the weeds in there a little bit.
Yeah. I said, so my position has always been on at least the lowercase gods that I honestly don't care one way or the other if they do exist. Like, I'm willing to grant for the sake of argument that maybe they do, but I don't really care in the grand scheme of things because they're not really the sort of beings that, that they answer the sort of questions that I want answered.
Well, they held power at one time when there were a lot of the nations, but they've lost that right.
Well, and say that's what happened for me whenever I started getting into Heiser is I end up with Heiser because when I was reading the Bible, there were things there that as I understood it, didn't agree with this typical popular level literalist translation that there's only one God, that no other spiritual being exists, because I already had these spiritual experiences coming in, and it didn't. And when I was reading the Old Testament, it didn't seem like they were taking that approach. That the authors of the Old Testament were saying there was no other spiritual beings. That they were saying there was other spiritual beings.
Yeah, and it says right there in Exodus, I will lay judgment. I will render judgment on the gods of Egypt.
Yeah, and
Rome.
so what Heiser provided for me was the scholarly backup to what I already intuited from my own readings of the Bible.
Yeah, because deep down I always knew that there were other gods. I just thought there couldn't be just one God out there, even if he is the almighty, all-powerful creator of all that is. There can't just be one being out there. There has to be many others.
Well, it makes the most.
That obviously comes from your Indian beliefs in the tree.
No, it wasn't Indians actually. It was many other factors.
Well, your belief in the Sky Father and the tree goddess.
No, it wasn't the Indian paganism. It was the Great Spirit.
Well, but see that was another touch point for me for the Old Testament, particularly, but even the New Testament, Paul talked about it, particularly, but even Peter and Jude.
Yeah, because Paul's speech in Athens, he references the gods that were a lot of the nations.
Yeah, and so that was another point where for me it was that where I say the Bible exposed the pattern of reality to me from my own personal experiences. I didn't have to say that all these previous spiritual experiences were complete BS. The Bible itself didn't say they were. The Bible itself said, yes, you did have real spiritual experiences with these other spiritual beings. They're just not the real God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the thing with when it comes to the lowercase gods is that they are all contingent beings, really, when you look at them.
Yeah.
Thor is a contingent being. So is Odin.
And that's even expressly stated in the mythology.
Mhm. Zeus and the gods are all contingent.
And
I mean, so, you would not go to Thor or Odin or Zeus and the others if what you wanted the answer to was why is there something rather than nothing.
yeah.
Because, they fundamentally, that's not what the questions that they even bother to answer.
No, and what you get is you're stopping too short of the ultimate answer. Right? You're stopping at middle management instead of going all the way to the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But whenever I started, well, how I got to Heiser was one of my early influences as a theologian in Christianity was N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, and as I was reading the Bible, there were some things that just didn't make sense to me. But I had this experience of seeing, like what I said, the pattern of reality being exposed in the Old Testament. It was making sense of my spiritual experiences, and it was making sense of human nature and stuff like that.
Or they could have been ancient aliens.
or yeah.
Either one.
It's
Aliens,
interesting. It's interesting
aliens.
science. It's interesting science fiction, but don't take it without a grain of salt.
Yeah. But I've come to this. Not only am I reading the Bible, trying to take it on its own merit, and it's convincing me of it, at least true in a spiritual sense of exposing the pattern of reality. So I'm convinced that the Bible is true, at least in that respect. So I start trusting the Bible because I'm also having other spiritual experiences that are in line with what the Bible is telling. And
But
so
isn't yeah?
Hmm?
But isn't the Holy Spirit your commentary guide?
Not necessarily. That no, that's not how that works. In my understanding.
Oh yeah, some village atheist actually told me today that if the Bible's the word of God, it has to be 200% word for word accurate.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
and what you got to get to though is what is its purpose? I mean, what is it trying to tell you?
Yeah, but these people grew up. Most of these people grew up fundamentalists, so they're not educated in the nuances or complexities of biblical scholarship and hermeneutics.
Yeah, and you know that's
When you point this out, they'll just double down.
Oh yeah, of course. And that's something that I rejected as well. You know, a lot of these militant atheists, internet atheists who are always all over the place, I reject the same God that they reject. Right?
That's the best
And
response. That's the best response, and the also best response when they point out that about the slavery and rape and genocide. I'm like, you can't use the Bible to prove the Bible.
that's a good point.
Especially in the rape case, it's not rape if she likes it, because they're not gonna pay attention to any rational response you give them anyway.
There's a lot of that, yeah. And well, you know, like I said, I've always studied history, and
all right,
you know,
hey, we're coming up on the hour mark. So I would like Ronald to give some information about where people can find him and what future projects he has in store for everyone in the future.
Okay. Well, I've got a YouTube channel that's in its infancy. I kind of kicked it off, but it slowed down on me. Reverend Ron's Revelation Room. You can find that YouTube channel. I've got a couple of discussions. It's more of a discussion than an interview or such. My desire with that channel is to have people of different beliefs or no beliefs, religious beliefs, coming on and having our worldview or philosophies interact dynamically with each other and just have discussions. That's Reverend Ron's Revelation Room. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, Ronald D. Potts. I use my name everywhere.
All right.
All right, go find them ASAP. Signing off. See you next time.
We'll see you.